They taught you forgiveness like it was a higher form of life. Forgive to be free, forgive to be mature, forgive to be the bigger person. And I get it. Forgiveness sounds like peace, but here's what no one tells you. Forgiveness doesn't live in your mind alone. It lives in the power map between you and the other person, because people don't measure your character by your intentions. They measure it by what you allow, what you enforce, and what you repeat. So when you forgive the wrong person, especially without changing access, you don't send a message of wisdom, you send a message of permission. Not permission in words, permission in outcomes. Tonight, we're not doing a moral lecture. We're doing strategy, not revenge. Not obsession, just clarity. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't end conflict. It postpones it and makes it smarter. Welcome to Velvet Strategy. Let's start with a brutal truth. The world reads behavior, not feelings. You can forgive someone sincerely and still be strong. But if your forgiveness comes with no boundaries, people will interpret it in a way you didn't intend, because the human brain doesn't learn limits from explanations. It learns limits from consequences. That's why the same act of forgiveness can mean two completely different things. Forgiveness with conditions and distance can signal, I'm stable. Forgiveness with full access and no change can signal, I'm safe to test, and here's the psychological mechanism behind it. When something is repeated, it becomes normal. When it becomes normal, it becomes expected. When it becomes expected, it becomes entitled. So if someone crosses a line and the relationship resets to normal quickly, you didn't just forgive, you trained them. You trained them that the cost of crossing your line is temporary discomfort, not structural loss. And to some people, that's not a warning. It's a business model now. Let's separate two types of harm. Type A, mistake harm. A person reacts badly, regrets it, repairs it, changes behavior. Type B, character harm. A person harms you as a pattern because control, dominance, or self-benefit is the point. Forgiving type A can be healthy. Forgiving type B without changing the game is dangerous, because type B doesn't experience forgiveness as grace. They experience it as data. This person avoids conflict. This person values harmony over enforcement. This person will recover and reset. This person wants to be seen as good, and once they know that, they know how to steer you. This is where Machiavelli becomes relevant. Not because he wanted people to be cruel, but because he understood a painful truth. Some people don't stop because you explained your pain. They stop because the environment became unprofitable. Here's the distinction that changes everything. Forgiveness is internal. Access is external. You can release your anger inside and still keep the door closed outside. But many people confuse the two. They forgive internally and then reopen access externally as if peace requires proximity. It doesn't. You can forgive someone and still say, you no longer get private access to me. You no longer get information about my life. You no longer get influence in my circle. You no longer get the benefit of my trust. That's not bitterness. That's boundaries. Because a boundary isn't a speech. A boundary is a design change. It changes the structure of interaction. If the structure stays the same, the message is, we can repeat this, and this is why. Machiavelli would call careless forgiveness a strategic error. It keeps the structure intact while hoping the person changes. And hoping is not a strategy. So let's talk about how harm returns. In modern life, most people imagine revenge as loud arguments, confrontation, drama. But the real-world version is often quiet. Reputation, damage, social isolation, subtle manipulation, narrative control, turning others against you without a direct fight. It's not a punch. It's a slow closing of doors. And here's the scary part. The person you forgave might not come back angry. They come back educated. Because a half reset teaches them your system. They learn what triggers you, what softens you, what makes you feel guilty, what makes you try to be fair. They learn your weak points not because they're geniuses, but because you kept them close enough to study you. Because forgetting isn't moral strength, it's information loss. and information loss is how you get repeated now. Let's make this practical. If you want to be strategic without becoming cruel, use a simple test before you forgive someone in a way that restores access. 3 questions. 3 filters. 1. Remorse. Do they feel regret or just inconvenience? Real remorse has a signature. They name what they did without excuses. They don't blame your reaction. They don't minimize damage. They don't rush you to move on. Fake remorse is performance. I'm sorry you feel that way. Let's not talk about the past. We were both wrong. You're too sensitive. Real remorse takes responsibility. Fake remorse negotiates the narrative point to repair. Did they pay a cost to fix what they broke? Words are cheap. Repair is expensive. Repair looks like restoring what was taken, correcting the story publicly. If they damaged your reputation, respecting new limits without complaining. Accepting consequences without bargaining if there is no repair. Forgiveness becomes a free reset, and free resets invite repeats. 3. Risk. If this happens again. What is the maximum damage they can do? This is the part most people ignore. They ask, should I forgive? Instead, ask, if I'm wrong, what do I lose? Because the right move depends on the downside. If the person has access to your career, your reputation, your relationships, your money, your mental stability, you do not gamble on hope. You manage risk. You reduce exposure. That's discipline. Machiavelli's lens is simple. People who can damage you should never be trusted on emotion alone. Trust requires constraints. There's a dangerous middle zone. You don't cut the person off, but you also don't fully trust them, so you keep them around carefully. That middle zone feels mature. It feels balanced, but strategically, it can be the worst option because half measures produce unclear boundaries, inconsistent enforcement, mixed signals. Constant negotiation and mixed signals don't create peace. They create a testing environment. Some people live for testing environments. They don't need to attack you directly. They just need you to stay uncertain, because uncertainty makes you manage emotions. Instead of managing structure, you become busy explaining, clarifying, forgiving, forgiving again, and that cycle drains your power. And here's the Machiavelli. Point without the drama. The most dangerous adversary is not the loud one. It's the one who stays close enough to observe you, while quietly resenting you. If a person felt humiliated, rejected, or defeated, and you left the door half open, they don't always leave. Sometimes they stay and plan quietly, not with rage, with patience, and patience makes harm smarter. So, when is forgiveness actually powerful? When it's paired with structure, here's the safe formula. Forgive internally. Limit externally. You drop hatred, not standards. You let go emotionally, not structurally. Because the goal is not to punish, the goal is to prevent repetition. And preventing repetition requires clear limits, enforced outcomes, reduced access. Time as evidence, not promises. If someone truly changed, they won't demand immediate restoration. They will accept distance as the price of trust. If they complain about your boundaries, that's information. It tells you they want comfort, not repair. Machiavelli would say it like this. A person who respects you will respect your limits. A person who wants to use you will negotiate your limits. This video is not telling you to be cruel, it's telling you to stop confusing virtue with vulnerability, because forgiveness without structure can turn you into a predictable target, and predictability is the enemy of power. So here's your velvet strategy question. Who benefits from your forgiveness, while paying nothing for crossing your line? And what would happen if your forgiveness stayed internal, but your access became limited? If this gave you clarity, subscribe to Velvet Strategy. In the next video, how silent sabotage works, the signs someone is undermining you quietly, and how to protect your reputation without starting a war. Like the video, subscribe, and this week, enforce one boundary calmly, cleanly, permanently.